All righty, let's calm down here and begin to behave. Good morning. I appreciate all of you coming in this morning. I'm Dave Hibbard, your presenter, and as you look at me, you're stuck with me until I'm done with this. Now, for some of you who've been here before, I've done this twice. The first presentation was Harriet Root. The second presentation involved a great-great-grandfather, a great-great-great-aunt, a great-grandfather, and maybe another person. So now we're down to the point we're running out of roots, and I'm going to deal with a few of the Hibbards because the Hibbards became tied into the roots. As some of you know, my grandfather, who was a Hibbard, met my grandmother, who was Fanny Root, when she was the head librarian here in 1908 in this very building. So I've got a lot of material here. Some of it I may skip, some of it I may not. And before I get any further, there are some materials on the back table. I have a book back there that involves all of the individuals that I'm talking about this morning. I have a number of other things back there involving some political materials from my grandfather, some stereopticons, viewers as well as cards for those of you that have never experienced that. And there is my grandfather's passport on a very dangerous journey that he once made during the time at the beginning of World War I, which I'm going to review with you. The first person I'm talking about this morning is Francis Elizabeth Root. She was born in Elyria. Oh, thank you. I love the fact that I have a lady that I've been married to for 54 years that's here to prop me up when I need to be propped up. So, this essentially is what you're looking at this morning. This is easy. Okay, Francis Elizabeth Root was born in Elyria, 1880. She died in 1954, and at that point she was a resident of Lorain. In her early days she spent there in the city. It was because of the fact that her father, my great-grandfather, was the Lorain County Auditor. In 1889, William Henry Root, who built the Root home, currently occupied by the Ben Norton family, passed away, and as a result of my great-grandfather getting out of politics, coming into Lorain to be a business person, he moved the whole family into the Root home as of 1890. So Francis Elizabeth Root was a part of the family that came here. She was often referred to as Fanny. So anytime I refer to her as Fanny from now on, you understand who I'm talking about. Don't ask me why, but despite the fact that she was up here by the lake, she graduated from Elyria High in 1898. I can't explain that except she had to have used a lot of streetcars to get over there from the old Root home. Oddly enough, Harriet Root, who was her younger sister, graduated from Lorain High only 5 years later in 1903. I don't understand it. Don't ask me to explain it. She, after college, went to Wells. And I don't know how many of you have heard of Wells College. It's in Western New York, a very small liberal arts college. It started in 1868 as an all-women's institution, and more recently began to admit men. And I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but just here about a year ago, Wells closed because of financial difficulties. So the school does not exist anymore. After graduating from Wells in 1902, she moved into some graduate work, we believe. This, by the way, is a picture of her from 1896. And I detected 1896 because there's a portraiture of the whole family that was taken that year. And I noted that in that picture, her presence was marked by the same dress as I see here. So I'm thinking that's when this photo was taken. This is her graduation picture from Wells in 1902. I don't know if what you're thinking when you look into her face here. But she was a person that just absolutely detested the fact that she had sometimes had to stand before a camera and have her picture taken. I pick up a little bit of that here, and I don't know what you're thinking. So she went on to Case Western Reserve University, and it was there that she was taking coursework. I don't know if it's because she was pursuing a master's degree or whether it was something dealing with credits for state certification. But either way, she finished up there in about 1905. She went to work in the Cleveland City Library System at the old Brooklyn branch of the Cleveland Public Library. It still exists today, but in another location, in another building. Now, in 1907, they had a vacancy here. It was about the second or third time they had a vacancy. They needed a head librarian. She applied, and guess what? She gets hired. So she became the head librarian here at Lorain Public Library in this very building. She had been here about 1 year, and in 1908, a gentleman by the name of Albert Hibbard wandered through the front door downstairs. He was selling stereoptic equipment, and he worked for Underwood and Underwood. And I don't know how many of you remember in your old history books from 30, 40, 50 years ago, you might be reading, and here's a picture, and in fine print below it'd say Underwood and Underwood. And what they did back in that day was to send photographers out to all parts of the world to photograph people doing any number of random things. And they turned them into these placards, a double exposure. Examples of those are back here. And you put them into the viewer and you saw 3D. And it was a very unusual medium at the time. And I invite you, after I'm done speaking here, to go back there if you have never experienced it and just try that out. The pictures you see are some geometrical figures, which they also put out for mathematical courses. And there's actually some photographs of my own family. If you don't know what a stereoptic camera is, it's actually two cameras mounted on one base. And they're aligned as such that, I'm not a medical doctor, but I think on most of us as adults, the irises of your eyes are about 3 inches or 3.5 inches apart. And so those cameras were lined up in the very same way. So they tried to duplicate the human vision, and when you put one of these cards in, this thing popped out at you. Very popular with the wealthy. Albert Hibbard came in here on a cold call because at that time Underwood and Underwood was attempting to sell into a new market, which were the big name East Coast schools, smaller colleges and libraries. Did he make the sale here? I don't know, but he found his wife. 2 years later, in 1910, Albert Hibbard married Fanny Root. That wedding took place at your front door, Ben. Albert Brown, the Congregationalist minister, married them there. And within 4 hours, they had packed up because my grandfather, Albert Hibbard, had received a promotion from Underwood and Underwood to go to England and run the London office. So they were on a streetcar in 4 hours after their wedding, headed to Cleveland, then to a train, then to New York, and then on to London. So they were there. He was running the office. And during their stint there, yes, thank you. Yes, I will. Thank you again. Thank you very much. This is a portraiture of her probably just before her wedding. What I've always found in going through the old family photographs, or what I've noticed more than anything as compared to other pictures, is the hairstyles and the clothing. And I've never seen this hairstyle except on my grandmother at this age. I estimate her to be about 29. And by the way, from my great-grandfather Orville Root, she married just a few days shy of 30 years old. Her younger sister Harriet Root remained a spinster, and so I often wondered, what kinds of great relief my great-grandfather felt when he finally found that at the age of near 30, his one daughter was at least going to get married. But I also would tell you that what was interesting about it was he promoted their education, because women did not have college degrees back in that day. Very few did. In 1912, she gave birth to her first son, who was Robert Root Hibbard. He would become my father. And then in 1913, his younger brother, William Loomis Hibbard, known as Willie, and he would become an uncle. In 1914, things started to heat up in Europe, if you know about your European history. Underwood and Underwood. I'm not there yet, thank you. In 1914, Underwood and Underwood sent a message to my grandfather. It said, "You need to close the London office because war is coming to Europe. You've got to get your family out of there now," okay? So that he did. My grandmother, Fanny Root, my father, and his brother evacuated London. He remained behind to close the office, but then a problem came up. I'm going to tell you about that problem when I get to Albert Hibbard in just a little bit. Eventually, he got out of Europe as well. The family came home and settled in Lakewood. By 1920, they had left Lakewood and had settled into the Root home because in 1919, Orville Root, who was at that point the patriarch, passed away, and so the daughters took over the house and the Hibbards moved in. Now, in the 1920s, it was the beginning of the time when my father and my uncle were raised in that home. They stayed there and grew up there. This is the portrait from 1924. This is Fanny Root Hibbard, my grandmother. This is my father at the age of 12, Robert Root Hibbard on the left, and William Loomis Hibbard in the middle. As we all know, in 1924 you had a large tornado here, and if any of you have ever followed that, as I understand, the National Weather Bureau declared it an F3, and if you've seen the pictures, which most of you probably have, you know it was bad. The photograph was taken, I think, in Rudy-Mach, and I don't know if this was, I'm going to think it was before the tornado, because I think that studio was affected by damage at that point. Shortly after that, Fanny was approached to write a report on the Red Cross's activities following the tornado. And that report appeared in the local paper January 2nd of 1925. I understand, and in fact, I have a copy of that particular paper preserved. They said they were going to also put a copy into the library. I've never wandered down there, but one of these days, if you're ambitious, you might want to wander down to Lorain Public Library. Say, I'm here to see Fanny Hibbard's report on the Red Cross doings after the tornado, just to see if they ever got it there. She also found her way back to the library board. She had left library science completely when she got married, served on the library board from 1925 to 35, and in fact ended up, when she retired from that job, as the president. In 1937, she and her husband, Albert, my grandparents, did a return trip to England. And of course, again, that was just ahead of the war. It always seemed to be these two were dodging world wars. We do have a photograph, it's back in the book back there, of the two of them together. She continued to do volunteer work, and I've got to tell you, I was not yet 9 years old when she passed away. And I don't need to explain to any of you that when a person who has cherished a friend or a family member passes away, you never quite get over it. And in this case, this was the first death in my family that really affected me. for I would wander over to the house. And my grandfather was there, my uncle was there, Harriet Root was there. But there always seemed to be that hole that was never filled with her departure. So she always had time for me. I found her to be a loving grandmother, extremely intelligent. In fact, she was referred to as academically brilliant by more than one person. She said to me one day, I'd wandered over there, and I said, Grandma, you can't spend any time with me today? And she said, no, your Aunt Harriet and your grandfather will spend some time with you. I've got to go down and do some volunteer work, which she did with the Red Cross, and she did it with a couple other agencies. That particular day, she said, I have to go down to the draft board. I'm 3 or 4 years old. The draft board. She said, yes, you'll find out what that is when you become a young man. Of course, we also know the draft board is a selective service, which has not functioned in this country for years because we now have an all-volunteer military. As a very young child, I always remember her sitting there reading magazines, books, newspapers. And I've mentioned this before in here, but she always sat there like this with a cigarette. And essentially that amounted to, in the end for her, as a bad case of bladder cancer, which took her life. And she died New Year's morning of 1954. And I've often felt of all of the relatives that I've loved and missed after their deaths, that in her case, she was the one where I got robbed. She was one person I really would have given anything to have known a lot longer than I did. But I always remembered her fondly, and even now, despite the fact that she passed away in the early part of my life, I still feel that way. The next individual I'm going to talk about is her husband now, which is my grandfather, Albert Hibbard. Again, hairstyles and dress. This is a photograph in 1895. He was born in Fitchville in 1876. He always used to say, it's easy to remember my birthday because it was the year of the American Centennial. So he went to school, grew up on a farm, actually graduated from high school in 1895. And this, by the way, was his graduation picture. He did things backwards. When I got out of college in 1968, I'd gone through high school, went to college, got a degree, got my certification, then I taught. He got out of high school in 1895, went into the Huron County public school system and taught 5 years as a 5th and 6th grade teacher. But back then, it was well enough that you just finished with an 8th grade education, let alone 12 grades. Following that, 5 years later, he then entered the College of Worcester. And he entered Worcester on they called it the Teacher Preparatory Program, where he would have a baccalaureate degree, get out and teach. He never got out and taught again. For during his college years, he was with Underwood and Unward, selling stereoptic equipment like I have back there. He described the money that he made as lucrative. So I have to deduct that he made most of his college money during the summer selling stereoptic equipment. He wrote a very short memorandum, or a memoir. He mentioned a couple of things. He said, of course, I made a lot of money selling equipment. He said it was always a treat to get into the wagon, load the wagon up, get the horses out, and go up to Rye Beach and spend 2-3 days at the lake. And when you got up there, the beds, you had to change the beds out, you changed the straw. So they roughed it back then. But he said it was always a great 3 or 4 days up there. He also mentioned an enjoyable bike trip to Ottawa. If you know your Ohio geography and you're around Toledo, Ohio, you got Ottawa County. So when he's down in Fitchville, you think, oh, well, that's a nice hike. You know, that's a nice little ride on a bicycle. No, this was Ottawa, Canada. He and another fella had perhaps bikes made by the Wright brothers, I don't know. But they took like a month, went up to Ottawa, Canada, roughed it up there and came back. So I got fooled by that one, because I thought, yeah, Ottawa, Toledo. No, it was not. He got out of college, went full-time with Underwood and Underwood. You know the story. He was selling. He walked in here, found his wife, went to Europe, and then in 1914, he's told, get your family out. Closed the office down. But there was a problem, and now I'm going to tell you that story. One of the Underwood and Underwood people, a manager, had been in Brussels, Belgium. I don't know the story behind it. He never conveyed it. One day the man got up for some reason, got a pistol, boom, killed himself. So all this equipment that belongs to Underwood and Underwood is in downtown Brussels. He's commanded, he says, you've got to get into Brussels and get the equipment out. But the problem was, despite the fact he had evacuated his family, the war had started. And between he and Brussels stood the German army. So, he got his passport, and if you know your history about World War I, they sent him in because the Americans did not want any kind of an incident that might tempt the United States to come in and fight alongside the British and the French. Now, I can make a lot of detail out of this, but I'm not going to. But he crossed the English Channel to Rotterdam in the Netherlands, got on a train. The line was open all the way to Brussels. But as he approached one point where the train stopped, he must have looked out his window and saw troops and trenches as far as he could see on both sides of him. The BEF, the British Expeditionary Force. Cleared through there, and then nothing, a no man's land. And they looked out the windows each side, troops, artillery, soldiers, the German army, where the train would again stop and he would be probably questioned and approved for clearance to go to Brussels. Essentially, he got to Brussels, got the equipment, got back out, and I'd love to be able to tell you what he described, but he shortchanged us. He described the journey in one word: difficult. So if your imagination is like mine, you can think of all kinds of scenarios where it may have been difficult. Particularly if you're there, you pick up photographic equipment, and it's a wartime and you're coming back through the German lines. I'm sure they were real interested in what he was carrying. What's that for? Do you have film? I'm hypothesizing, I don't know. But he said it was difficult, he got back out. And another thing I'll tell you, which will go into the photographic record here because it was not written down, was that the Brits got word that he was leaving, and so the Department of War gave him a micro camera and said, take photographs where you can. If you think you're going to be caught with it, throw it away. Do not take notes. We'll develop the film. You'll come back and talk to us. He doesn't know whatever happened to that, but he did turn the camera back in when he got here, and he got away with having it. So that was quite an adventure. So he came home, but there was one other adventure he had just before the war broke out. The Underwood and Underwood office got a call one day from Downing Street. And I'm sure all of you have heard of 10 Downing Street. And 10 Downing Street's where the British Prime Minister resides. But there are other houses there with other numbers on them. And you have the various officials of the British government. So he got a call to bring a camera and come by the residence of the British Exchequer. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the title or not. The exchequer happens to be the British equivalent of the Secretary of the Treasury here in the United States. So he gets there, the fellow's name is David Lloyd George. He said, like a portrait you're taking. It was a dark, rainy day. He took several shots. He felt they were not coming out right. And so in the end, he said, you know what, I'm going to take a gamble. They found a white pillow. He told David Lloyd George, put that white pillow behind your back and lean back. And they had him posed reading a book. And he'd take a picture, which turned out. A copy of that picture is back on the table with his signature on it. And if you don't know who David Lloyd George turned out to be, he was one of the big four at the end of World War I. He represented Britain, Clemenceau represented France, Orlando, Italy, and Wilson, the United States, in negotiating the Treaty of Versailles. So that was one little souvenir that he picked up back there. All right, so he goes into business after coming home. He worked for another company selling stereoptic equipment. Then he went to a business with two other fellows. They called themselves Bacon, Hibbard, and Ekman. They sold heavy equipment and farm equipment. And they did reasonably well through the 1920s until 1929. And that pretty much was the end of that deal. From then on, he pretty much was semi-retired. He continued to do a few part-time jobs if he were called upon to do those. He liked beekeeping, he farmed, he had his own garden plots, and so forth. So he pretty much lived the life of a retired gentleman. This is another picture of him right after about the time he was married. London, thank you. This is him about 1935 when he was retired. He also, because he was semi-retired, decided to take a gander at politics. So in 1936, he filed for a position as Lorain County Auditor, ran under the Republican ticket. In his primary, he did extraordinarily well. He eliminated his other Republican comrades. Then he went into the election of 1936, and if you know your politics in the 1930s, it was all Democrats. He more or less said, I did well in the primary, got my butt kicked in the general election, and that was the end of that. I'm going to walk back here for a moment because, and there's something here that involves you, Ben, and I don't know if you remember this, but I'm going to piece this together for everybody and you'll know what you gave me. Several years back, Ben told my mother, he said, listen, if Dave comes home, I got something for him. You remember this? Yeah. Ben found this in the garage. I thought we cleaned everything out in the garage. This is probably the last poster that survives of this printing. There's probably 3 print sets here. If you're reading this backwards, it's Hibbard. That's what you gave me. Thank you for giving me that and restoring a little bit of the family's history there. So it's back here if any of you want to take a look at this after we get done.
So did he get elected?
No.
No, he was beaten badly.
1936 was Roosevelt.
1936 was Roosevelt, and it was all Democratic, practically everywhere. If you were a Republican back then, you might as well just thrown the towel in.
But don't forget, politics are local, so just because on the national level, local time sometimes.
Sometimes you had, oh yeah, in some of the rural areas, you still have Republicans surviving. There's always exceptions, yes.
Yeah, but Lorain would have been especially dependent on Roosevelt.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was up against it.
All right, so One of the things that he also fooled with gardening and politics is in the early 1950s, he got into this tree planting project. He wrote the state of Ohio Agricultural Department, and they had some program going on. He ordered like 3,000 pine trees, eastern white pine trees, little sprigs. And he starts planting these things across the street from the Root House. He started planting them up on the 60 acres or 80 acres, which is now part of the James Day Park over across the road from the Burrow home. If today you take a car down French Creek Road, almost to the railroad spur, take a left and go into the park, and go deep into the park to the picnic area, you'll notice a whole area, particularly on the right side of there, the east side of the park, there's a bunch of pine trees there. Those are the trees he planted back in 1951. All of us one day in kindergarten received one of these things. Mrs. Worth, my kindergarten teacher, said, "Now children, we have Arbor Day today, and we have a gentleman coming in who's going to explain to you why it's so important to plant trees and maintain greenery." Okay. Who walks in but my grandfather? Like, what the heck? Where did this come from? I said, in fact, I think I spoke out. I said, "That's my grandfather." And somebody goes, "What?" So I took my little sprig and I planted it in back of the home that we lived in on Root Road. The last I saw, it's still there and it's quite big. So it still, to my knowledge, survives unless it got so big that it's been cut down. But I think it's still there. And what unfortunately happened is a lot of these trees might still stand, but people who used to hike through there, gee, December 15th, I got a saw on me, and a bunch of them were cannibalized for Christmas trees, even though it's my opinion that an eastern white pine is not the best Christmas tree. He used to take me with him and garden. He showed me how to use a shovel and a hoe. He also had a chicken coop. He had some Rhode Island Reds. And I don't remember this very well, but they would attack me. And one day he was out shouting in the back of the house, "I am not going to have the chickens attacking my grandson." And so for 2 to 3 weeks, there was a lot of chicken, freshly cut chicken on the dinner table of the Roots and the Hibbards. As he went out there with an axe, and, one by one, they were gone. So unfortunately for the chickens, they picked on me, and he wasn't going to have it. I loved to play chess with him. And he always used to have this card trick. He'd pick up a card, and for a long time he'd say, "Man, this is a hot one, it must be red." And finally I noticed what he was doing. He was bending the card a little bit, and then he could, every now and then, reach to, "Oh, it's an 8 of clubs. Ooh, yeah." And finally I said one day, "Grandpa, you're spoofing me. I know what you're doing." And he said, "Yeah, okay, all right, no more of that, you caught me." So that ended the card trick. What was a tragedy here is that he had a stroke in 1957, and it really did him in. He became a semi-invalid. There was a time afterward I went over one day, and he was up and well enough. A couple months later I said, "Grandpa, do you want to play checkers?" "Yeah, let's play checkers." And I ended up a 12-year-old boy with a really broken heart. He kept taking my checkers and trying to jump his own. That was the last time I played checkers with him. Funny thing about it is, though, one of the family members sat down with him one day because he seemed to still know people and faces. And they said, "Albert, do you remember this? They started in 1957. No. Moved back to 1950. Do you remember this? No. Do you remember this? Went all the way back to about 1934. Do you remember this? Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's da-da-da-da." And everything was erased from 1934 forward to 1957. It was just the weirdest thing in the But he lived as a semi-invalid for about 10 years, or 8 years. And then one day in the front yard, he had an unwanted encounter with a gypsy woman. He used to like to carry a wallet on him. He never shopped anymore, but he'd carry a few bucks in his wallet. He always walked around with his cane. He usually had a probe on the other arm where he would just pluck weeds out, just walk to the yard for hours just to have fresh air. One day this car stopped and a gypsy Roma woman gets out, comes up and says, "Let me heal you." So he starts backing up. He's way out by the street. He finally backed up so far, he got right to the door of the house, and she took off and got in the car and left. But what she was trying to do was take his wallet, but yeah. Thank you. I almost was going to go by there. I also have 2 other stories for you before I discuss his death. See that bald head? There's 2 real good stories about this one. I always noticed as a child, he'd sometimes bang his head and there'd be a little bump and scab over. One night he was gardening on the other side of Lake Road, or East Erie Avenue, from the Root home. He had a little plot over there. And twilight came upon him, and he thought, well, I'll pick up my tools and walk back to the house. So he walked up to the street to check the traffic, and he was right under a traffic light. He didn't have his hat on because the sun was not out. He usually wore a hat. And suddenly it's like just all kinds of pain. And it's like, what the devil's going on here? And all of a sudden, he thought he heard flap, flap, flap. And he was just mystified. But he went in, put his tools in the garage, walked into the house. You ever seen how a chocolate sundae looks? You got the ball of vanilla ice cream, and the chocolate is streaming down all the sides. Well, that's the way his head looked, except it was bloody. And it was, what happened to you? And he goes, I don't know, I was waiting for traffic to go by and something happened. And so apparently they took him to the hospital, and the doctor looks and says, looks like an owl landed on your head. So apparently he had an owl that landed on his head and was trying to scraped his head up, trying to get a grip to stay there because his head looked like a nice place to rest. He took off. So we solved that mystery. Then this very same thing happened to him. He wandered in the house one day, and there was blood streaming down his head. And apparently what had happened was, he was out walking on the lake bank. And the lake bank was a very jagged thing because of the erosion patterns. Well, apparently he's walking along, and he leaned a little bit too far to the right, and then he took a dive down the lake bank and apparently rolled down to the bottom, and he got up, and apparently he must have scraped his head on some rocks or other stuff. Comes into the house, and he's once again, it's like, my God, what the devil happened to you? He looked like the hot fudge sundae thing. Well, I fell over the lake bank. So he was lucky that there was nobody around. He managed to get back up the steps. But that's not the end of the story. They took him down to the hospital, and outside the emergency room there was no parking. So they drove around a block. And all the parking places were filled, but there was one way down the block, and they missed it. And they said, gee, there's no place to park. We've got to get you in there. And he goes, oh, there was a place to park? Well, did you see that? There's a block. There's a parking place back down there. There's nobody in there, and there's still time on the meter. He was always one of these guys that looked for parking meters that had time on them, because he was not going to use his own damn nickel to buy some time on a parking meter. So those are every time I see this picture with his bald head, I never saw either event, but I was filled in by family members. He eventually went to Florida to live and lived the last 14 months of his life there. He passed away on January 20th, 1965. And Who is it? Okay. So and then, Harriet Root had told me that he ended up in the Panama City Hospital. And about 6 months later, when she was back up again, she says, David, she says, your grandfather was just wore out. She said, they had the clipboard at the bottom of his bed, and she said, about a day before he passed away, I went in there and looked at the clipboard. Page after page, just, she said he was just wore out. He'd come as far as he could. He currently, like my grandmother, rests in the root plot over in the Garfield Cemetery. They're your neighbors now. They don't have much to say anymore, unfortunately. All right, the next person is Robert Root Hibbard. This is a photo taken of him in London, England, about 1914, before he was brought home because of the war. Albert Hibbard, his father, I've just been talking about, is standing next to him there. He basically grew up in Lorain once he got back here, spent a little time in Lakewood again, went through the Lorain city system. He was supposed to graduate in 1930 in the class of 1930B, which is June, but he graduated in 29B. And I'm not sure how many of you here are aware of it, but back then, if you demonstrated academic excellence, you could skip a semester. He did that twice. So he ended up graduating a year early. Well, when he got out, he was preparing to go to college, or so he thought. Well, my grandparents said, no, you're not going anywhere. You're barely 17 years old. You've got some growing up to do. You're going to stay home for a year and go to work. How many of you maybe remember Longwell's Market? Is that familiar? At least one hand. St. Anthony's Parish, Shoemaker's Drugstore, Longwell's Market. He worked there for a year as a stocker, and he was kind of like a special shopper that became in vogue with the recent COVID thing, where somebody would shop for you. They'd take phone calls, take the orders. Here, Bob. He would do the shopping, deliver, and take the payment. In 1930, Harriet Root, his aunt, my great aunt, said, well, Bob, let's go look for colleges. So they packed up and took her Rio, magnificent car. They went to the Mid-Atlantic states. They went into a lot of the Ivy League schools. What happens, he comes back, and in the end, he registers to go to college at Worcester College, which is where his father graduated from in 1904. So he enters Worcester College in 1904. About 4 weeks later, during freshman initiation, my grandparents got a call from the Dean of Men late on a Saturday night. Mr. and Mrs. Hibbard, yes, this is such and such Dean of Men at Worcester College. There's been a major incident here involving your son. You need to come down. Oh, is he okay? Oh yeah, he's fine. You need to come down. Well, we'll come down in the morning. No, you'll come down now. So, make a long story short, freshman week, my father was out on campus with 2 other guys. A number of upperclassmen saw them and go, hey boy, come here. Oh no, we're not going to do the initiation routine. They ran into a dormitory. Apparently the upperclassmen split off and went around the other side to come in. And the main group stayed right behind them, so they had them sandwiched into the hallway. They had nowhere to go. All right, so now, how many of you in a public school have been in a situation where you see the fire alarm, where you would have the big pole pipe with the brass bell, and right next to it there's a big glass case with a big fire hose in it and a valve and maybe a small extinguisher? Yeah. And they drove the guys with the fire hose out one end of the dorm and locked it, turned around and went after the other guys, drove them out the other end and locked the door. And by God, first floor of that door, which resulted in a call from the dean of men. Make a long story short, I don't know how he did it, but he behaved himself for the next 7.5 semesters and graduated. He was on social pro, by the way, the whole time. In 1934, graduated with a bachelor's degree in chemistry.
He was
Okay.
resourceful.
I don't know any conversations, and I'll tell you this. I did not know this story until Harriet Root, who, by the way, paid for much of his college education, said, David, I'm going to tell you this. And then she starts pointing a finger at me, and she said, if I find out you have started telling this story, you're going to hear from me. Yes, ma'am. No problem. So that's where I got that story from. So my father gets out. He goes to work for the old Lorain banking company down here at 6th and Broadway. To make a long story short, an ethnic gentleman came in one day and said, came to his window, his teller window, and said, hey, I need to send some money back to the old country and to my family. Can you do that? Well, yes, I can. So my dad, and by the way, this was one of his gifts. He knew how to listen. He always used to tell me, keep your mouth shut. You sometimes talk too much, Dave. Gotta do this. Gotta find out where you're at before you open this up. So he prepped this, gave the guy a receipt for a deposit, gave him another receipt that said he was gonna wire the money. And it got to the point after a while that the people with ethnicity were coming into the bank. Go up to teller's window, I'd like to wire this money back to the old country. Oh, no, you're not Mr. Hibbard. No, Mr. Hibbard's the only one who can do this. And finally the bank got wise and said, if these people start coming in and they want to talk to him, just funnel them over there. It was PR. And essentially he got to be the man that was the wire man. If you needed money sent to the old country, you came in and talked to Bob Hibbard. That's the guy that did it for you. And it got to the point the bank said, close your window down and go over, spend the next hour and a half, go over and wire the money, because he had so many of these he had to do. Now he did that for about 3 years. And in the process of doing that, he met Ruth Estelle Coster, also a teller. And I don't need to tell you who they would become at some point. All right, so he's there for about 3 years. During about the end of that period and just before he went to another job, in Christmas of 1937, either my father or my uncle got an air gun for Christmas. Now my dad is 25 at the time, and I always used to look at him as a person who was quiet, mild-mannered, straight shooter, but I began to realize that he had this impish side to him. He always had a little tendency to lean toward the mischievous. So he's 25, my uncle was 24. My grandparents said one day, we're going out behind the house. Okay, fine. They were sitting in a room with a Christmas tree, and one of them, I don't know which, was playing with the thing, loaded it up with either a BB or a pellet, and there's a Christmas tree. Ooh, did you see that ball drop off there? Here, give me that, let me try it. See that light up there? Bam! Ooh. I mean, these are grown men, okay? Just absolutely destroyed this tree. About the time my grandparents came back, they shot off the last bulb or the last light. Yeah. I can't tell you what was said, except for the fact if you looked at the drip line on that tree, it was all glass shards underneath. And I don't know who cleaned it up, I would imagine they did. And that marked the last Christmas tree that was ever seen in the Root house, probably till the time of Norton's taking over. I can't tell you where that tree was, Ben, but I also have a sneaking suspicion that there was enough power in that gun that some of those things maybe got embedded in a wall somewhere. So if you ever
I'll check it out.
Yeah, check it out. Yeah, check it out. You might have some lead or some copper somewhere in your house that doesn't need to be there.
That was all horse hair plaster.
Yes. Yeah, they loved wallpaper in that house before your time. Okay, so at any rate, he leaves the bank, he goes to Standard Oil of Ohio, and he's working in a laboratory down there. And for my father, this was really a great thing because he was working in the area that he wanted to be in. He was in a chemical laboratory. He was a chemist by trade. He was trained to be that. He also acquired a Harley 74, which was the big Harley model back then. He accidentally had a rollover at an intersection one day in Cleveland. His way to work. I said, "Did you get hurt?" He said, "No, I kind of picked myself up, scraped myself off, and people ran over to help me, and I was fine. I went on to work." Another experience was that he survived being poisoned by arsenic. And I thought, well, now, how did that occur? And he said, well, he says, you know, near this Ohio lab, there was this nice little diner, seated about 30 people. It was always crowded. We'd go there for breakfast or for coffee. He says, I went there one morning and ordered pancakes, became deathly ill, went down to the hospital. All of a sudden, people start coming in the hospital deathly ill. Did you have breakfast this morning? Yeah, where'd you eat? At the diner. Where'd you have breakfast this morning? At the diner. At the diner. At the diner. There's 10 or 12 people who were sick. So as it turns out, the owner of the diner had gotten angry at one of his employees. Okay. He was mixing up pancake batter for the next day. I don't know where he got the arsenic from. Put it in the freezer. He said, yeah, I'll go. He fired me. And these people started eating arsenic-laced pancakes the next day. My dad was one of them. That guy went to jail for I don't know how long, but they caught him big time. He took a trip out to Yellowstone on his Harley 74. And this was one thing about my dad I could never understand. He just kind of put details out of his mind. He couldn't really tell you much once it was behind him. He went out there in the Harley 74 and he came back like this. What happened to your motorcycle, Dad? I guess it quit running, or I sold it. I don't remember. He says, I might have leaned it up against a tree and stuck it thumb out. He worked at Society lab for about 7, 8 years. And then he went on board with an organization that was known as NACA, the National Advisory Council for Aeronautics. That became NASA in the late 50s. My father became what was known as an aircraft fuels specialist. I didn't think there was much to it, but when you think about it, all the different plane designs, all the different engines that are used to propel those planes, all of them required a different fuel mixture. That's what he did. Thank you. He's still in Britain, by the way. I found this photograph interesting. He's got a little English gal there. She's seemingly very interested in him. But he seems to be really far away. I don't know where his mind is. This is his graduation picture from 1929. And in the 50s, he spent all his time with fuel. And I got this from my mother. He would have never told me this himself because he was very modest. He apparently was the man that took the lead nationally to convert all of the commercial air fleets from propeller-driven to jet-fueled. Makes me proud as hell to say that. But that was mainly his baby. That was the big job that he did in the 50s. In the 60s, he was working in auto pollution. He was ordering motors from General Motors, Chrysler, and Ford. He came home to me one day and he said, I'll tell you what, I've been testing a lot of motors. And he says, one of the finest running motors is the Ford V8 289 cubic inch engine. And he says, those are the dirtiest damn engines you've ever seen. He says, they really need a lot of cleanup. So he was working on pollution controls. I know somebody here that had a 289. Robin Stumper. All right. In 1962, NASA had some money and decided to take a portraiture of all of their people. This was a result with my father. This was taken in May of 1962. I'm always proud to see this up, and I think it's truly the way I've always remembered him. He was 50 years old that year. And he had some other things about him that were a little bit impish. During the 60s, he came home one night. I was in college, and I was home for summer vacation. Walks up to me and says, shake my hand. I said, what are you talking about, Dad? You don't shake hands. Usually a slap on the back, you know. How you doing? Shake my hand. Okay. Shook his hand. I said, so? And he says, you just shook the hand that shook the hand of Warner von Braun not 2 hours ago. How many of you do not know who Warner von Braun was? Everybody knows. Nobody knows? I think most people know. He was the German scientist that was probably the lead scientist in World War II that we captured. And his baby initially was the V2, which was used to bomb London. Not a real effective weapon, but a good terror weapon. Later for the United States, he developed a massive Saturn V that took us to the moon, a rocket that had no faults on it. It never failed. So he got to meet him. He was in there to look at some projects relating to his rocket, and somebody said, well, we have an aeronautics division. He said, oh, well, good, I'd love to go over there and meet some of the people, and my father got to meet him. But let's keep in mind one thing about Warner von Braun. We've always kind of idolized him in terms of rocketry. Still, he was a man that developed a rocket that terrorized London. Number two, he was a Nazi. So let's not forget that and put that in perspective. There was another night we were sitting at the dinner table. My dad suddenly lights up. He looks over at me and he goes, oh, we got to go down the hall. I got a dirty joke to tell you. I go, what? He said, I got a dirty joke to tell you. We're going to go down the hall. It was a really great joke, but I would never, ever repeat it anywhere. Came back out, sat down. Now, my mother was always one of these people that was kind of squeaky clean. And we came back out, sat down at the dinner table. I'm just kind of laughing like crazy. And she looks over at him, and he says, I knew you'd like that. And she's over there like, wow. And he goes, ah, you know, that type of thing. So even in his 50s, he's one of these guys that's still a little bit impish. All righty, what else here? Oh, yes. One other item about his work at NASA. You got to keep in mind he worked with a bunch of scientists. They were all very, very creative people. There was 240 people in the chemical division. He was the number 2 man in that division. Oftentimes ran it when his boss was out. And he would have ran it otherwise, but when he took his doctorate program at Case Western University, he got to the very end. He said, it's time for your thesis. And he goes, I think I've got enough to get me through life. And he walked away from it. So he never completed his thesis. Otherwise, he would have ran it. But apparently one day, it's going to be a little bit of bathroom humor here, so I'm going to warn you about this. There was a fellow there that was known to have his daily constitutional every day at straight up 10 o'clock. And one guy came up with this brilliant idea of really having a good time with this situation. So they watched him for 3-4 days like clockwork. 10 o'clock, he went to the restroom. So one morning they set all up. They set up a big beaker, put some water in it, got a Bunsen burner, heated it up to 98.6, which understands body temperature. Got a little bit of yellow dye, put that in there, heated it up, kept it ready to go. And then they took a big baster, like you'd have for basted turkey, and they drew all this yellow water out to the baster. And one guy says, okay, now I'll go. He says, I'm going in, you guys come in behind me, don't say anything, and just, we'll see what happens. So he goes in there with a baster, and this fellow was in the stall next to the urinal. So this guy walks in there, and he kind of sets up like he's drunk. He's going, oh man, I really had too much to drink last night. I really got to go. Oh, here's the urinal. And then he takes the baster, and he starts a stream of water running down the side of the modesty shield instead of in the urinal. And they said, all of a sudden, this guy just erupted. Hey, what the hell's going on? And they said he flew out of there with his pants down. and here's all these people looking at him like, oh, we got you. Have a good day. Finish up. And this guy wouldn't talk to anybody for about 2 days. And finally, he came and he says, okay, you got me. It was really good stuff. So, at any rate, I told my dad, I said, that's good to know my tax dollars are at work. He said, yeah, that happens sometimes, you know. So, but he always had a light side to him, despite the fact that he was quite quiet. He retired in 1972, partly because of Nixon's austerity program. Anybody 60 had to go. He turned 60 that year. He continued to work part-time later, though. And he was also a person who liked to sail. In fact, he introduced me to sailing. And we sailed together for any number of years. One day in 1977, he thought he'd better go to the doctor. He was not feeling well. And by the way, too, he'd become a director of the old Lorain Telephone Company in 1971. So he had some things to keep him busy, but he was not well. Doctor said, let's try an antibiotic. This might be an infection. If he does not work out, come back. Make a long story short, he came back, not feeling well. In the end, they noted that there was probably a growth. He had a surgery done on him. It was found to be a tumor. And he fought that tumor for about 1.5 years before succumbing to it. It was ovarian, or not ovarian, but it was the omentum. Not ovarian. They got there. Right. Mesothelioma. He passed away on January 27th, 1979. And his death was one that I really took hard. I'm running over. I've made myself a liar. Are y'all still good if I keep going a little bit? I'm going to let that story go. I'm not sure I trust my emotions. So at any rate, though, I missed him dearly. And he, like the others, rests now inside the Garfield Cemetery in Sheffield. The last person here is William Loomis Hibbard, born 1913, and he died in 1980. He was my dad's brother. I was going to read a section that I wrote for him, but I think I'm going to just explain a few things to you and wrap this up and take questions since we're running over. He was, to me, a very massive man. He was 220 pounds, 6'2", which is not so big these days. And I remember that he was a very different man than my father. He did like for intelligence, but he did not like academics. And he got sent away to Mercersburg Academy in southwest Pennsylvania. It was a military thing. He graduated from there rather than Lorain High because my grandparents pulled him out of there. He was not doing well. I can remember he was explaining he had gone into the Merchant Marine. He was not eligible for the military. And he talked about how he was around Okinawa during that time where they were having the kamikazes. He said they always looked for the phosphorescence of a moving ship by looking for the blue-green V that a ship would make during the night. and they would aim for the back of the, or the top of the V, because they knew they'd hit the ship. And he says, oftentimes at night, he said, we just killed the engines and we sat there. And you just watch these guys, they'd race their engines, flash their lights, trying to draw anti-aircraft fire, and we just sit there and watch. He says eventually, one by one, the engines would sputter, they'd run out of gasoline. But he said, I saw some really hair-raising situations where heavy cruisers and destroyers opened up with everything they had, particularly during the daytime when everybody was vulnerable to those attacks. He had a place in Florida, and as a result, all the Hibbards and the Roots turned into snowbirds every winter and went down. I remember the earliest experience I had with him, he used to come at me like this all the time. I finally asked my dad one day, he said, what is this junkie messing with me? And my dad said, well, he used to wrestle. Oh, well, that made sense. I figured that one out. But the first time I saw that, it was an absolute terror. He came at me like this. I was 2 years old. And I was in the dining room. I was in the dining room bed. Comes over, picks me up, just lifted me right over his head. I was up on the ceiling, starting to scream bloody murder. He walks over and he goes, rah, and he slams. He did a body slam on me. I remember landing on the couch going, and I turned around, he's coming at me again, and all. Man, I started crying. I was scared to death. I thought I was going to die. And then he's kind of looking at me, and he stops, and he turns around, and he looks at my dad. And my dad said, you're scaring him. So that was the last time I ever got an honorary body slam from my uncle. He made an occasional trip up to Pelee Island. He loved sailing. He also got into motorboating. And every now and then he would take his 22-foot line and go to Pelee. He would go out to Lorain Harbor, set the compass at about 320 degrees, lock the steering in, put the heel to the steel, and sit back for about 45 minutes until he saw Pelee Island. And I said, oh, Willie, why would you go up there by yourself? What do you go up there for? He goes, Dave. He says, now you're too young for this. He says, I can't go into the grocery store and get Canadian beer. I gotta go up there to get the beer myself. Okay, whatever. He was a part owner in a Star-class sailboat. He and a fellow named Merle Beatty that owned that boat went up to the Star Regionals. They placed second, and that's tough to do. It was either after that race or another race, another time. It was late in the day, and they said, well, let's sail home to Lorain. So they sailed out into the lake. And after a while, it's like, where's Lorain? Where's the harbor at? I mean, man, it's dark out here. And finally, they're looking at their watches like 3, 4 in the morning. They were supposed to be in Lorain by like 11 o'clock. And all of a sudden, they realized in the shipping lights, here comes a big work carrier with the lights blazing, waiting. Oh, we'll follow him in. So they followed him in. Sun comes up. They look around. They go, where in the hell are we? They asked the fellow. They said, where are we at? He said, what do you mean, where are you at? What city is this? What harbor? And he says, you're kidding me. No, where are we at? He says, well, welcome to Ashtabula. So they'd overshot Lorain by some 60, 70 miles, spend another day coming all the way back down here again. But nothing bad happened to him. Now this last thing is something that he worked on for years. He had the middle stall in the garage on the Root property. When he was perfecting this technique, there were traffic lights which no longer existed. So if you're familiar with the east side, what he would do, he'd get his car up to 60 miles an hour between Nebraska Avenue and Euclid Avenue, heading east. And at Euclid Avenue, he used to pop the car into neutral. He's doing 60 miles an hour according to speedometer. And Why he ever developed this, I have no damn idea. So he'd start coasting. He'd coast and he'd coast finally, and had to get the light green at Root Road. Otherwise it'd screw him up. If the light were green, he would go through the light, and then he had to make a left-hand turn. So in order for that to occur, you couldn't have any oncoming traffic. Pull into the driveway, he's still coasting. Go down the drive, come up to the garage, and he's still moving a little bit. And Ben knows this, that there's no gutter on the front of the garage, so there's like a little trough that's been carved out across the front. Front end of the car goes in and comes up, slows the car even more. Back end, the wheels go into that little trough, come up. It's just enough that he comes to a stop without putting his brakes on. If he's just a little bit off, then he would tap the vertical support beam in the back of the garage. I think you know what I'm talking about. That's your challenge for today, then. You live there, we don't. You know. So he was a fun guy to be around. In 1963, he retired, and he went south. And a lot of, I talked to a few folks down there when I went down there several times in the 70s, and I said, your loss, our gain, your gain was our loss. They really were glad to have him down there. I was always disappointed to see him go south, but he loved the place. He fell in love with it in the 1930s when the property was bought. So here is William Loomis Hibbard. This was taken 10 days after his birth in 1913. This is him in 1935. Can you see the mischievousness in his face? You see that? He was kind of like my dad, but he was a little more open about it. Again, they were brothers. And then this is the way I really remember him. Bill Murray. Does that look familiar to you?
Yep.
You were right behind me when I took that photo. I don't know if you were in a water getting ready to ski or not. But that was taken in September of 1966. He was aboard his lineman. That was truly my uncle right there. That's the way I've always liked to remember him. Now, he, in 1980, was ailing. He went to a heart hospital down in Tallahassee. And he said, is there anything that you can do? And they essentially said, go home and put your affairs in order. As long as you're not in pain, no problem. And he was dead within 10 days. Unlike the others that ended up resting in the Garfield Cemetery, he's in Florida. One thing that's significant about his passing, he is the last member of the Root family to carry the actual genetics. Went all the way back to William and to Henry, who came west in the covered wagon. That brings you to me.
Don't forget the roads. That's the road.
Oh, yes.
That's very important.
His main occupation was road builder. He worked for Ohio Engineering. One of the things he did was to widen the road between the old sanitarium on North Ridge Road and Amherst down to 113. He kept telling them, this is not going to be a good road. They said, well, that's the money that's available. Sure enough, that road came apart and about 3 years had to be redone. There's one other story about it. I worked at John Buller's Ohio station. He was a franchisee, Colorado Avenue and 611, or Root Road. I was working in there one day. A gentleman came in to see my boss, John Bulger, and he said, who's that fellow working over there? It's Dave Hibbard. He's a college student. He works for me in the summer. Hibbard? Yeah. Can I talk to him? Sure. So I got introduced to this fellow. He says, you related to a Willie Hibbard? I said, that's my uncle. He says, I worked Ohio Engineering for a while. I worked under him. He says, let me tell you a story about this fellow. He said, we were doing a major road repair and paving. And he says, we had to dig, there was some piping that had to be changed. There was a big water line. or not a particularly big water line, but big enough that could cause you problems if it broke. And they had this massive hole dug out. They were down to a valve at about 8 feet. The guy digging the hole severed the pipe. Immediately it starts to fill in. But what was noted was that the break on the pipe was just after the valve. So if you got to the valve and shut the valve off, you could begin to pump the hole out and make the other repairs. So they start blaming the fellow that did the digging, and my uncle stepped forward. He said, "That's enough." He said, "I'm the supervisor. This is my territory. Let's fix this." So he said, okay. He stripped down to his skivvies. There's this water just frothing out of this hole. He said, "Get a rope." They tied a rope around him. He said, "Here's the keys to my truck, my wallet, put it all in the truck, get the truck going, get the heater going, and I'm going to go down and shut the valve off." So he went in, and he made several trips, and these guys really got nervous because they started saying, "Is he pulling on the rope? Is he in trouble?" No. He'd come up and get a breath of air and go down again. Finally, they noticed that the flow out of that break was smoothing out, and all of a sudden, on the third trip down, so this big cheer went up. He had gotten the valve closed. He came back up, says, "Get me out of this hole. I'm going to my truck." And it was a dangerous enough thing, but the problem was that the temperature was 35 degrees. This was in November. And he took it upon himself to go down there and get this thing done. And this gentleman told me, he said, "You ought to be proud of him." And I said, "I'm proud that you just told me this story."
Do you
And he said,
remember why he said he would go into the hole? They need to know why he said he would go into the hole.
Well,
Besides being the supervisor, it was very important. The other guys were married, they had
oh,
families.
that's true too. Yeah, he was looking out for a bunch of guys that were married. Thank you. It's nice to have friends in high places.
But he did, he said, "These
Yeah.
were, I don't want any of you to risk your lives."
Right.
as you
He was a
did."
single man at the time, and he was a confirmed bachelor, but he surprised us all when he married Faye, who was a local resident down there. So I got a message one day, "Dave, you got a new aunt, you got an Aunt Faye." Willie got married. So, all right. That brings you to me.
No, tell them also what the guy said to you about your.
Oh, yeah, he did say there isn't a man there who wouldn't follow him into hell, if that's where he were going. That's how much they thought about him. So, that brings you to me. I've been proud to do these 3 videos and to review the lives of all these people, which very much oriented around service, particularly with Harriet Root. But all of them in one way or another seem to serve some capacity, serve the public. And as a person who did not get into the family by genetics, but by adoption, I was really, really very, very fortunate to land on my feet. I can't tell you how fortunate I feel to have been brought here, to have been a person who grew up in Lorain and who can claim these people as my ancestry. I'm proud of each and every one of them. I'm sorry I can't go back in time to meet those who came and left before me. There was a time 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I was sitting in the basement by myself working on this. Elaine was upstairs. I think all of you know that at one point or another a discussion has come up in your lives where the discussion kind of centers around religion a little bit, and that we're supposedly all here for a purpose. I've talked this over with a few people, and just about everybody I've ever talked to says, "I don't know why I'm here. It's not really clear." But I had this really funny feeling come over me in the basement one night that said, maybe this is why I'm here. Maybe this is why I ended up in Lorain instead of out west of here in another state. Now, there was no angelic chorus that flowed out of the basement ceiling toward me, and none of this soft light that bathed me and all that stuff. But it was just a feeling that this is what I should be doing, organizing the family's history, all from a four-drawer file cabinet. All of this stuff just laying around in it. And to sit down, do the provenance on all this, and organize it, it's been my pleasure. You're still with me. Are there questions? Yes?
What was the joke your uncle told you?
That was my father. No, I'm not going to go through that one, because that just absolutely destroyed this whole presentation. I would get censored by the Lorain Historical Society. I'll tell you right now. But it was good, and I did laugh at it quite a bit, robustly, and like I said, my mother, and he says, you know.
Yeah, David, you never told me about the tornado collection that you found out, and we never knew about it before.
Oh, yes, I can add one other fact about my grandfather. I don't know how many of you know, but after the tornado, there were actually 4 sites set up at entrances to the city to collect money from people who were coming into town. They set up at 4 points: Penfield Junction, East 31st Street by the bridge, Colby Road and West Erie Avenue, and on East Erie Avenue and Road. And they, for 5 days, collected funds. They set up some little booths and signs and said, can you contribute anything that you have? A quarter, a nickel, $1. And in 5 days' time, they raised $2,700 for the Red Cross. How do I know this? I happen to find my grandfather's paper in the receipts. There's one thing that the Roots didn't throw away, was paper records and photographs and documents. That's how I know what I know. Any other questions? Yes?
You probably told us at the last presentation, but was Root Road named after your great-grandfather?
Yes.
Yes, pretty much so. In fact, actually, it would go back to William.
Yeah, great.
So it took the family name. Yeah. There's a Root Road over in North Ridgeville, not related. That's somebody else. Any others? Thank you for staying with me. I've been made a real liar this time. And I appreciate your coming down here today. Thank you very much. This task is done.